diolch am cyfle I siarad â chi heddiw. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. I've been asked to talk about the saints, and I've been asked to talk about discipleship. So let's see if I can weave those two things together. But I want to start with a deliberately provocative statement and ask you a question. Did Jesus really break into time and space, was born in abject poverty, lived a sinless, perfect life, died an horrific, painful, forsaken death, conquered even death itself? Did he do all of that for the establishment of an institution with its robes and its liturgy and its ancient buildings? Is that what this whole thing was about? Is that what we were trying to achieve? Is that what Jesus actually died for? Now, I want to be careful with this statement and be less provocative and say to you, institutionalized Christianity is not necessarily a bad thing. It can be, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. We need institutions. We need to organize ourselves somehow. We need to find a way of working. And of course, the church itself didn't get out to the first century before it organized itself. I have no problem with robes. If you've got to wear something, you might as well wear robes. And I'm definitely an advocate of wearing something. And I'm not having a problem with liturgy. Every denomination today has liturgy. It has a form of words which it uses to give order to its services. And I certainly have no problem with ancient buildings. I've lived in Wales long enough to understand that it rains a lot. So buildings is altogether a good thing. But what I'm trying to push for is an understanding that these are not the primary things. These are simply the tools we use to outwork the primary thing. Therefore, we need to dig a little bit and try and find out what the primary thing is. What is our prime objective? What has Jesus asked us to do? And we don't have to go too far to be able to find that out. If we just wander into the Gospels, and the end of several of the Gospels will tell us to go into all the world and make disciples of, well, literally all people groups. So to go into the world and make disciples. So institutions is fine, and robes is fine, and liturgy is fine, and ancient building is fine, as long as they exist as tools to enable you and I to make disciples. That's what we're trying to do, to introduce people to Jesus and allow them to become more and more like him, the process of making disciples. But why is this whole idea of the Celtic Saints important to us? Well, because of an interesting point we find ourselves in history. 6th century, when those Celtic Saints were doing what they did, it was against the backdrop that that Rome had already evangelized Britain, or certainly made an attempt to evangelize Britain. By the time we hit the 6th century, we're left with small pockets of Christianity which crop up in various parts of Britain at that point. And so what the Celtic Saints are doing is not starting from scratch. They are re-evangelizing a nation. They're introducing people to Jesus, and they are helping make disciples. So they're redoing what was once done. And we find ourselves at a very interesting point in history. I would suggest to you that our task is not to start from scratch. It is about the re-evangelization of a nation, and it's about making disciples. And we get to set about doing that. But we can learn something fundamentally important about these Celtic saints. And undoubtedly, I was supposed to choose one and focus on that one, but I can't really. They worked together, they functioned together, a well-oiled machine for introducing Christianity or re-evangelizing a nation. They would set off on corrals and move around the nation. They would use the waterways as ancient motorways, as somebody once said, and using the monasteries as service stations. They would stop at the monastery, refill, and set off again for the purpose of evangelizing and making disciples. But there is another interesting observation that I want to share with you. It's written in the words of Paul Cullity, and he says this: if I were to visit 10 Anglican churches on the same Sunday, I would hear virtually the same prayers, readings, and experience a very similar type of worship. It's not to say that some churches aren't more alive, whatever that may mean, than others, only that the forms are usually quite similar. On the other hand, from what we know of the early Celtic churches, there is no hint of uniformity, no uniformity around their services. Often each local abbot would compose the prayers used for worship. Often the whole liturgy for communion would be changed and a new one adopted as a result of some itinerant pilgrim's contribution. And so what the early Celts understood really well was the basis of contextualization. What does the gospel look like here? It was John Mbiti who said Christianity is always the beggar at the door, changing and morphing into whatever form it might take to reach people in that place. And we need to learn to do that afresh. We need to contextualize our mission as the early Celts, the early Celtic Christians showed us how to do, so that we can work at making disciples and introducing people to Jesus wherever we might be, whatever form that might take, pouring out the creative energy of the God who created all things, so that you and I can be effective makers of disciples, that we can fulfill the mandate that Christ himself gave us. Go and make disciples of all people groups. Now, I'm using people groups deliberately. That little phrase there means people groups. Young people are a people group. Children are a people group. Older people are a people group. So what's the best way? Contextualize our mission to evangelize and disciple different people groups. And I think there's something in the pattern of those early saints, those 6th century saints, Dyfrig and Illtyd and Tylo and Padarn and Dewi Sant, of course. There's something in their practices which will enable us to present and evangelize and make disciples. Diolch yn fawr iawn.